Picture this. It's the middle of February 1943, somewhere in the scorching deserts of Tunisia. German officers are standing around a freshly captured American tank, and they have no idea they're about to discover something that will haunt their engineers for the rest of the war. This isn't just any tank. This is War Daddy 2, an M4A1 Sherman, and it's about to completely shatter everything the Germans thought they knew about American manufacturing. What they're about to find out will trigger a crisis so deep that it'll echo through their entire war machine until the very end. And here's the crazy part. The Germans weren't defeated by superior firepower or thicker armor. They were defeated by something they never saw coming. Automotive engineering so good it simply refused to break down. Stick around, because what German engineers discovered when they tested this single captured Sherman will blow your mind. Mid-February 1943, Sidi Bou Zid, Tunisia. The battlefield had gone quiet, and sitting there in the sand was a prize the Germans couldn't believe they'd captured. An M4A1 Sherman tank, completely intact and fully operational. You could still see the American star painted on its side, barely covered by the hastily slapped-on German cross. Officers from Heavy Panzer Battalion 501 were already gathering around it, pulling out their notebooks, because they knew this was something special. This wasn't just some knocked-out wreck they'd have to drag away. This tank could actually drive. And that single fact was about to change everything the German military thought about American industry. The tank had a name painted on its hull: War Daddy 2, serial number USA 367641, built by the Lima Locomotive Works, and it belonged to Company G of the 1st Armored Regiment of 1st Armored Division. These weren't just random numbers to the Germans. This was intelligence. This was proof of American mass production on a scale they could barely comprehend. Here's where it gets interesting. A German reconnaissance unit was ordered to drive this Sherman 350 kilometers across North African terrain, all the way to the port of Sfax. Think about that for a second. 350 kilometers. That's about 217 miles of desert, rocky terrain, sand, heat, everything that would normally destroy a vehicle. The journey took 4.5 days, and during every single kilometer of that journey, something strange kept happening. Actually, let me rephrase that. Nothing happened. Nothing went wrong. The engine never overheated. Not once. The transmission never failed. The final drives just kept working, kilometer after kilometer, without a single complaint. Now, if you're not familiar with German tanks, you need to understand something. German tank crews were used to their vehicles breaking down constantly. Even on short movements, they'd have to stop for mechanical repairs. It was just part of operating a German tank. You'd plan for breakdowns the same way you'd plan for fuel stops. But watching this American tank, it just worked. No drama, no emergency stops, no desperate repairs, in the middle of nowhere. It simply drove where they pointed it, day after day, through conditions that would have left a German tank dead on the side of the road. The German crews watching this were getting seriously uncomfortable. This wasn't supposed to happen. American equipment was supposed to be inferior. Mass-produced junk that looked good on paper but fell apart in real conditions. That's what they'd been told. That's what they believed. But here was this Sherman, just casually proving them wrong, with every kilometer it covered. When War Daddy 2 finally arrived at the port, it was loaded onto a cargo ship bound for Germany. The Army Weapons Office had issued crystal-clear orders. This tank must reach the testing facility at Kummersdorf intact and operational. Why? Because German intelligence had been receiving fragmentary reports about American tank production, numbers that seemed almost impossible. Thousands of tanks rolling off assembly lines every month, standardized parts that could be swapped between vehicles without modification, production speeds that German factories couldn't match even in their wildest dreams. But seeing numbers on paper is one thing. Having an actual physical vehicle sitting in front of you, that makes it real in a way statistics never can. The Sherman represented mass production at a scale Germany simply could not match, built with automotive engineering principles Germany had never fully mastered. As that ship steamed northward across the Mediterranean, Wehrmacht engineers back in Germany were preparing testing protocols that would reveal some hard truths. Truths about their own limitations and about American capabilities they'd massively underestimated. Spring 1943, Kummersdorf Proving Ground, Brandenburg, Germany. When War Daddy 2 rolled off the transport railcar, German efficiency kicked in immediately. They assigned it a designation, Beutefahrzeug 259, and slapped a German license plate on it, WH058941. Then the engineers went to work. And when I say went to work, I mean they went absolutely methodical. They stenciled armor thickness measurements and angles across every single surface of the tank, marking it with precise notations for the most comprehensive evaluation program German engineering could devise. Kummersdorf was located about 25 kilometers south of Berlin, and it served as Germany's primary testing facility for both their own equipment and captured Allied vehicles. This place was serious. Meticulous engineers measured everything: track tension, transmission efficiency, engine temperatures under load, fuel consumption rates, cooling system performance. They documented their findings in exhaustive technical reports that would eventually make their way up the chain of command. The Sherman was about to undergo an automotive examination, more thorough than anything it had experienced in American testing. The initial inspection involved teams of specialists from multiple technical branches. They photographed every component from dozens of angles. They measured every clearance with precision instruments. They documented construction techniques that seemed impossibly straightforward compared to the complexity of German methods. And almost immediately, something caught their attention: the transmission. German powertrain specialists gathered around it like surgeons examining a medical miracle. You see, German tanks used straight-cut gears in their transmissions. These gears required incredibly precise tolerances and constant maintenance. They were expensive to manufacture, difficult to replace, and prone to failure if not handled exactly right. The Sherman? It used herringbone-cut gears. These gears distributed stress across multiple teeth simultaneously, which meant they were incredibly durable and required far less precision in manufacturing. They were also much more forgiving of operator error. Here's the kicker: herringbone gears had been standard in American automotive manufacturing since the 1930s. For over a decade, American car companies had been churning out these gears by the millions for civilian vehicles. German engineers knew about herringbone gears. They understood the theory. They'd considered using them, but they decided they were too difficult to mass produce given Germany's industrial capabilities and workforce training. The Americans had been manufacturing them by the thousands. In tanks, the testing program began with basic automotive trials designed to stress every mechanical system under controlled conditions. Engineers drove War Daddy 2 through obstacle courses that replicated battlefield conditions. They measured fuel consumption. They monitored engine temperatures. They recorded transmission behavior under varying loads and different types of terrain. After each trial, they'd disassemble components to examine wear patterns, looking for any signs of stress, inadequate lubrication, or design weaknesses that might show up under extended use. The results? They contradicted absolutely everything German tank doctrine had accepted about the necessary trade-offs between performance and reliability. The Sherman performed adequately in every single category they tested. But here's where it got interesting. It excelled in the one metric that German tanks consistently failed: operational endurance without maintenance intervention. This thing just kept running and running and running. Let me explain what the powertrain examination revealed, because this is where you really see the difference in design philosophy. The Sherman transmission had 5 forward speeds, plus 1 reverse. Gears 2 through 5 were synchronized, which eliminated the need for double clutching during normal operations. Think about what that means. Double clutching is a complex technique where you have to carefully match engine speed to transmission speed during gear changes. It requires significant skill and practice. German tankers spent considerable time in training, just learning how to shift gears properly without damaging their transmissions. The Sherman? It was nearly as easy to drive as a civilian car. You could take someone with basic automotive knowledge, give them minimal training, and they could operate the transmission without destroying it. German designs assumed that highly trained specialists would always be available to operate their vehicles. American designs accepted that ordinary soldiers with basic skills would be operating these machines, often under extreme stress in combat situations. The Continental R975 radial engine in this particular Sherman demonstrated something that really impressed the German engineers: remarkable tolerance for varied operating conditions. They noted that the engine maintained consistent performance across temperature ranges that would have caused German engines to overheat or lose significant power. The cooling system was relatively simple in design, but it proved highly effective. The air filtration system handled desert sand without the frequent clogging problems that had plagued German tanks throughout the North African campaign. Every single system they examined reflected the same underlying philosophy: practical functionality over theoretical optimization. The Americans weren't trying to build the perfect tank on paper. They were trying to build a tank that would work reliably when some scared 19-year-old from Iowa was driving it under fire in the middle of nowhere. June 6th and 7th, 1943. This is where things get really interesting. Reich Minister Albert Speer arrived at the Hillersleben artillery range to preside over a major armaments conference. Speer was responsible for German armaments production and was personally accountable to Hitler for results. The demonstration program included hill-climbing trials comparing German tanks with captured Allied equipment. War Daddy 2 sat alongside Germany's latest and greatest designs: a Panther medium tank, fresh from production, a Ferdinand tank destroyer, representing Germany's most advanced armored fighting vehicle technology. These were the vehicles that were supposed to win the war for Germany. The Sherman was about to embarrass them. The Sherman climbed the test slope smoothly. Its manual transmission shifted without hesitation. The engine maintained consistent power throughout the entire ascent. The driver handled it with confidence, making it look easy. The Panther followed. Its more powerful 700 horsepower Maybach engine allowed it to match the Sherman's performance, but barely, and with considerably more difficulty. You could see the driver working harder, being more careful with the controls. Then came the Ferdinand. 65 tons of German engineering sophistication, equipped with an electric transmission system that was supposed to represent the future of tank design. It stalled partway up the incline, just stopped, dead. Speer watched as recovery crews struggled to restart the vehicle, this embarrassing failure happening right in front of dozens of senior officers and industrial leaders. You can imagine the awkward silence. Years later, Speer would write in his memoirs about Sherman capabilities. He observed during an inspection tour of Italy in October 1944, he noted that reports on the cross-country mobility of the Sherman had been very favorable, with the tank climbing mountains that German tank experts had considered inaccessible to tanks. He attributed this to the Sherman having a very powerful motor in proportion to its weight, giving it cross-country mobility that was definitely superior to German tanks. The 26th Panzer Division had specifically reported this advantage in their field assessments. These observations from Germany's armaments minister carried serious weight within Wehrmacht circles. There was even a public assessment that appeared in Das Reich newspaper on June 27, 1943. The article described the Sherman as one of the special accomplishments of North American laboratories and called it quite a praiseworthy product of the North American steel industry. The article mentioned the gyro-stabilized gun as the first attempt of its kind ever made anywhere, acknowledging American innovation. Now, these public statements were carefully worded for propaganda purposes. You couldn't appear defeatist in Nazi Germany, but they couldn't completely hide the private alarms spreading through German engineering departments. American tanks weren't just adequate, they were fundamentally better engineered for sustained field operations, and there was nothing Germany could do about it. Back at Kummersdorf, systematic testing continued through the summer and into autumn of 1943. Engineers measured the Sherman's operational range with extended trials that pushed the vehicle to its limits. They documented operational ranges exceeding 2,000 kilometers before requiring major maintenance. To put that in perspective, early model Panthers could achieve maybe 500 kilometers in field conditions. The Sherman could go 4 times as far. They measured transmission efficiency that exceeded any German tank, with power losses through the drivetrain significantly lower than comparable German systems. They examined that synchronized manual transmission that made gear changing smooth and simple, requiring neither the double clutching nor the careful rev, matching that German transmissions absolutely demanded to avoid damage. The final drives presented another major revelation. German Panther tanks used final drive systems inherited from the Tiger design, a configuration that was seriously prone to failure under stress. The design used straight-cut gears and housings that proved inadequate for the loads imposed by a 45-ton vehicle. German mechanics in North Africa and on the Eastern Front had been reporting final drive breakdowns constantly, forcing Panthers to be abandoned after relatively short movements, sometimes less than 100 kilometers. The Sherman's final drives, built using those same herringbone gear principles as the transmission, rarely failed, even under sustained combat conditions that would absolutely destroy German components. Restoration projects decades later would find Sherman final drives that needed virtually no mechanical restoration after years of storage. That's testament to design margins that exceeded immediate requirements by huge factors. By late 1943, Kummersdorf had accumulated enough data to produce comprehensive internal reports that circulated through Wehrmacht technical branches. These documents, intended for senior Wehrmacht officers and armaments ministry officials, painted a sobering picture of comparative capabilities. The Sherman demonstrated American automotive engineering maturity that Germany fundamentally lacked, despite all of Germany's theoretical knowledge and scientific expertise. Mass production techniques allowed tolerances that would be considered sloppy in German precision manufacturing, yet resulted in more reliable vehicles that functioned better under actual field conditions. Interchangeable parts meant field repairs could be accomplished with basic tools and minimal specialized training. German vehicles required factory-level precision and specialized equipment for many repairs. The entire American design philosophy prioritized keeping vehicles operational rather than achieving theoretical performance maximums that looked impressive in specifications but couldn't be maintained in actual combat. Internal German engineering assessments documented observations about American industrial advantages that went way beyond simple production numbers. American automotive engineering reflected decades of civilian industry experience that Germany had never developed at comparable scale. Before the war, the United States had widespread automobile ownership. Cars were commonplace among ordinary citizens across all economic classes. You could be a factory worker and own a car. You could be a farmer and own a truck. Germany? Cars remained luxury items for the wealthy and party elite. The Volkswagen program that had been promised to German workers since 1934 had delivered fewer than 1,000 civilian vehicles by 1939. Think about that. An entire nation with almost no civilian automotive culture trying to build complex military vehicles. This vast difference in automotive industry maturity translated directly into tank design philosophy. Americans built tanks that mechanics with civilian automotive training could maintain, using skills they already possessed from working on cars and trucks. Germans built tanks that required specialist training and constant expert attention from personnel with years of specific military technical education. The comparison with German tank reliability became absolutely impossible to ignore as field reports accumulated through late 1943 and early 1944 Panther tanks required strict operational restrictions to prevent mechanical failures that would leave them stranded in enemy territory. Drivers received explicit instructions not to change gears frequently because excessive shifting damaged the transmission. Third gear in particular broke so often that field manuals warned against its use except when absolutely necessary. Panthers could not turn while backing up because this would destroy the transmission. Pivot turns were only possible when ground resistance was equal on both tracks, which severely limited tactical flexibility in combat. Foreign objects entering the running gear could jam the drive sprocket, requiring hours of maintenance work to clear. These problems existed despite Panthers being built in dedicated tank factories by skilled workers using the best available materials Germany could provide. The Sherman, by contrast, had been designed by automotive engineers at General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler. These companies applied mass production principles they developed over decades of manufacturing millions of civilian vehicles. The tank incorporated commercial automotive components wherever possible, leveraging existing supply chains and manufacturing expertise that already existed. The transmission came from multiple manufacturers, including Caterpillar Tractor, Buick, and Ford Motor Company, all building to identical specifications with fully interchangeable parts. This standardization, which was completely routine in American automotive industry, remained largely theoretical in German tank production. Each German manufacturer introduced subtle variations that prevented true parts interchangeability between vehicles. Additional captured Shermans arrived at Kummersdorf through 1943 and 1944, tanks taken from British units in Italy, tanks captured from Soviet forces on the Eastern Front, who'd received them through Lend-Lease. Each captured vehicle underwent similar testing protocols, building a comprehensive database of American tank capabilities across different variants and production periods. The British had refitted some Shermans with their 17-pounder anti-tank gun, creating what they called the Firefly variant. This addressed the Sherman's main weakness in firepower against heavy German armor. German engineers examined these modified tanks with particular interest, noting how the Sherman's large turret ring accommodated the significantly larger gun with minimal modification. The Firefly demonstrated growth potential that had been built into the original design, something German engineers hadn't considered when specifying their vehicles. The Panther, which had been rushed into production to counter Soviet T-34 tanks, had zero capacity for significant armament upgrades without a complete turret and vehicle redesign. It was maxed out from day one. The automotive testing program expanded to include reliability trials specifically designed to replicate combat conditions. Engineers drove Shermans through hundreds of kilometers of cross-country movement, recording every mechanical incident, every maintenance requirement, every component failure. They compared these results with field reports from Panther and Tiger units operating on the Eastern and Italian fronts. The numbers told a story that was impossible to argue with. Panther, operational readiness averaged below 40% through most of 1943. Some units reported catastrophic rates as low as 20 to 25%. That means in some Panther battalions, fewer than 1 in 5 tanks were actually capable of combat operations at any given time. By comparison, Sherman tanks maintained substantially higher operational availability across all theaters. Let me give you specific data from German field reports, because these numbers are devastating. In July 1943, during Operation Citadel at Kursk, Panthers achieved only 16% operational readiness. Mechanical failures eliminated more tanks than Soviet action. By December 1943, readiness had improved to 37%. February 1944, still 37%. April 1944, they finally reached 50% operational. May 1944, they achieved 78%, which was celebrated as a major success. These figures represented the percentage of Panthers that were actually capable of combat operations on any given day. The rest were broken down, awaiting parts or undergoing repairs. Even the best Panther readiness rates never matched what Shermans achieved from initial production in 1942. By December 1943, the pattern had become absolutely undeniable to anyone willing to look at the data objectively. Engine lifespan for the Sherman diesel variant exceeded 3,000 kilometers under proper maintenance. Panther engine lifespan barely reached 1,000 kilometers, even after improvements addressed the worst early problems. German reports from March 1944 documented that improved Panther engines achieved service life of 700 to 1,000 kilometers, and this was presented as a success story. Think about that. They were celebrating reaching about 1/3 of Sherman diesel capability. Sherman transmissions required minimal maintenance between overhauls, with those synchronized gears making driver error less likely to cause damage. Panther transmissions demanded constant attention and frequent repair, with third gear failures so common that drivers literally learned to skip from second gear directly to fourth gear just to avoid using the problematic third gear ratio. Sherman final drives operated reliably under conditions that routinely destroyed Panther. Final drives within 100 to 200 kilometers of operation. That's not even a full day's movement in many combat situations. Field reports from German units actually using captured. Shermans reinforced all the Kummersdorf testing data with real-world operational experience. German mechanized units, desperate for reliable vehicles as their own tank inventory degraded, eagerly employed any captured American tanks they could obtain intact. Here's something interesting. Unlike Soviet T-34 tanks, which Germans extensively modified before using, Shermans entered German service without any changes. They didn't require modification because they worked correctly as designed. There were no fundamental flaws that needed correction. German tank crews who had experienced multiple mechanical failures in their own vehicles found the Sherman's reliability genuinely remarkable. They frequently commented on it in letters home and in official reports. Reports from panzer regiments noted that Sherman operators could focus on tactical considerations and combat effectiveness, while Panther and Tiger crews constantly worried about reaching the battlefield without breaking down, or completing missions before mechanical failure immobilized their vehicles. The 10th SS Panzer Division captured 12 M4A3 Shermans at Hatton in January 1945 during Operation Nordwind. These tanks had belonged to the American 43rd Tank Battalion and were captured intact when their crews abandoned them during the German assault. The Germans formed these 12 Shermans into the 13th Company of the 10th SS Panzer Regiment, and they served in combat operations for the remainder of the war. These tanks served as reconnaissance vehicles and mobile reserves, roles that required sustained movement without maintenance stops and reliable mechanical performance. German commanders recognized what Kummersdorf testing had proven years earlier. American tanks could be relied upon to function when needed. This dependability, more than firepower or armor protection, determined tactical utility in the final months of the war. Think about it this way. A Sherman arriving at the battlefield with an operational gun was infinitely more valuable than a Panther with superior firepower broken down 20 kilometers behind the lines. You can have the best gun in the world, but if you can't get it to the fight, it's worthless. January of 1944 brought expanded testing programs as Wehrmacht forces retreated across multiple fronts and additional captured equipment reached Kummersdorf. Engineers examined different Sherman variants: the M4A1 with the Continental R975 radial engine, the M4A2 with twin General Motors 6046 diesel engines, noting its superior fuel efficiency, the M4A3 with the Ford GAA V8 gasoline engine, which American crews considered the best Sherman power plant. Every variant demonstrated the same fundamental characteristic: excellent automotive reliability derived from sound engineering principles and quality manufacturing processes. The consistency across variants really impressed German engineers, who were accustomed to significant quality variations between different manufacturers, producing supposedly identical vehicles. The diesel-powered M4A2 particularly impressed German engineers. Soviet forces received 4,102 of these tanks through Lend-Lease, and significant numbers fell into German hands during fighting. On the Eastern Front, the twin GM 6046 diesel engine provided performance, matching any Sherman variant while consuming substantially less fuel than gasoline engines, a critical advantage as German fuel. Supplies dwindled throughout 1944, Germans say, Designers had experimented with diesel tank engines but abandoned the effort due to manufacturing difficulties and the complexity of fuel injection systems. American industry produced diesel Shermans alongside gasoline variants without disrupting production schedules. demonstrating manufacturing flexibility and technological sophistication that German industry never achieved during wartime conditions. March 1944 brought reports from General Heinz Guderian, Inspector General of Panzer Troops. He noted in official communications that improvements to Panther reliability had achieved what he termed acceptable standards by early 1944. Engine life had reached 700 to 1,000 kilometers. Final drive problems had been largely resolved through design modifications and improved manufacturing processes. This improvement presented a significant success in German military communications, merely brought Panther reliability to a level the Sherman had achieved from initial production. In 1942, the German army was celebrating reaching standards that American tanks had exceeded from the very beginning. It highlights just how far behind German armored vehicle development had fallen. The comparison grew even more painful as German tank production struggled with increasing resource shortages and Allied strategic bombing. Allied bombing campaigns targeted key bottlenecks in Panther and Tiger production chains with devastating effectiveness. The Maybach engine plant in Friedrichshafen suffered severe damage from Royal Air Force Bomber Command on the night of April 27th to 28th, 1944. The raid involved 322 aircraft and is described in Imperial War Museum archives as the most damaging raid on German tank production of the entire war. The attack also destroyed the ZF gearbox factory right next to the engine plant. Production of tank engines and transmissions halted completely for 6 months. When production finally resumed in November 1944, quality control had degraded significantly. Slave labor increasingly employed in German tank factories as German workers were conscripted for military service introduced deliberate sabotage. Cigarette filters jammed in oil passages, gaskets installed incorrectly on purpose, components assembled without proper clearances. These problems never affected Sherman production, safely located in American factories, thousands of miles from any combat zone, and staffed by motivated workers earning good wages under decent conditions. The fundamental difference between American and German tank production wasn't engineering knowledge. German engineers understood automotive principles just as well as their American counterparts. They had extensive theoretical knowledge and scientific expertise. They simply never applied those principles consistently to tank design, instead prioritizing other factors that looked good on paper but didn't translate to battlefield effectiveness. German tanks emphasized performance characteristics that made for impressive specifications but poor reliability in field conditions. The Panther's powerful 75mm gun and thick frontal armor came at the cost of an overtaxed powertrain that couldn't reliably support the vehicle's 45-ton weight. The Tiger's formidable capabilities demanded complex maintenance procedures and frequent repairs by highly trained specialists. These trade-offs might have been acceptable if German industry could produce enough vehicles and enough spare parts to maintain them. It couldn't, particularly as Allied bombing intensified and raw material shortages worsened through 1944 and 1945. American engineers, trained in automotive mass production through decades of civilian industry experience, designed tanks that could be manufactured by the tens of thousands and maintained by mechanics with basic training using skills they'd learned in civilian life. The Sherman powertrain used components proven in commercial service, with design principles borrowed directly from automobile and truck manufacturing. The electrical system even included a backup generator that could power turret traverse when the main engine stopped, a feature that seemed like unnecessary luxury to German designers, but proved invaluable in combat. German tankers could only dream of such conveniences, particularly those who had experienced their turret traverse failing when their engines stalled on slopes during combat. By spring 1944, Wehrmacht units on all fronts reported increasing mechanical problems as manufacturing quality degraded and spare parts became increasingly scarce. Panthers required transport by rail for movements exceeding 100 kilometers because their final drives couldn't survive sustained road marches. Field commands issued explicit orders restricting Panther movement to preserve the vehicles for actual combat, rather than losing them to mechanical failure during approach marches. Even the Berge Panther recovery vehicle, built on a Panther chassis specifically to recover disabled Panthers, shared the same reliability problems as the tank it was supposed to recover. German commanders faced a grim reality where mechanical failures eliminated more tanks than enemy action, with some units reporting that 70% of tank losses were due to breakdowns rather than combat damage. Meanwhile, Sherman production continued at unprecedented rates that German industry could never match. American factories produced 49,224 Sherman tanks during the war. That's more than all German tank production of all types combined. British Commonwealth forces received thousands through Lend-Lease. The Soviet Union received over 4,000 diesel variants. Chinese forces in Burma used Shermans to devastating effect against Japanese armor. Every theater where Sherman served confirmed what Kummersdorf testing had revealed. Properly maintained, Shermans kept running under conditions that would disable or destroy German tanks. German tank crews who captured and used Shermans universally praised their automotive excellence in letters, reports, and post-war interviews. Reports from the Eastern Front noted that German mechanics found even the complex Chrysler A57 multi-bank engine, with its 5 separate engine blocks, easier to troubleshoot compared to German tank engines that required specialized knowledge and equipment. The Ford GAA V8, praised by Allied crews for its exceptional reliability and power output, seemed remarkably dependable to German mechanics accustomed to Maybach engines that required constant adjustment of valve clearances, ignition timing, and carburetor settings. The General Motors twin diesel, which the US Army had actually rejected as less reliable than gasoline engines and relegated to Lend-Lease production for Allies, far exceeded the performance and reliability of any diesel engine German industry had produced for tank applications. Let that sink in. What America considered not good enough was still better than Germany's best effort. The Sherman's generous design margins provided another advantage that German engineers came to appreciate. The basic transmission and final drive components, originally specified for the 30-ton M4 with 400 horsepower, required no major modification to handle the 42-ton M4A3E2 jumbo assault tank with its significantly increased armor protection. The same components that powered the standard Sherman successfully transmitted 650 horsepower from experimental engines without failure. German engineers calculated that such overbuilding represented waste, excess capacity, that increased production cost and used scarce materials without immediate benefit. American engineers understood that margins provided growth potential for future upgrades and battlefield reliability that made the extra investment worthwhile over the vehicle's entire service life. By summer 1944, German tank commanders facing the Allied invasion in Normandy knew their technical disadvantages extended far beyond individual tank capabilities. American artillery superiority, devastating close air support, and overwhelming logistical capacity combined to overwhelm German forces, regardless of tank specifications or tactical prowess. But the Sherman's reliability meant American armored units could sustain continuous operations that German panzer divisions simply couldn't match. American tank battalions could launch attacks, sustain combat operations, conduct pursuits, and immediately prepare for the next operation without extensive maintenance halts. German panzer divisions had to carefully husband their limited operational vehicles, calculating that every movement consumed precious remaining component life and brought mechanical failure closer. The difference in operational availability determined which force could maintain offensive pressure and which had to carefully ration its limited combat power. German use of captured Shermans in combat operations provided final proof of American automotive superiority from the German perspective. The 150th Panzer Brigade, formed specifically for infiltration operations during the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, attempted to obtain captured American vehicles to disguise their operations. German planners wanted Shermans specifically because of their reputation for reliability. However, The brigade received only 2 Sherman tanks, and only one proved serviceable enough for operations. The serviceable Sherman never actually saw combat due to massive traffic jams that prevented the infiltration operation from achieving its objectives. But think about the significance here. In an operation requiring vehicles to function without breakdowns while operating behind enemy lines far from any support, only American equipment offered reasonable chances of success. German tanks, even when fully operational, couldn't guarantee the sustained performance such missions required. January 23, 1945 brought the final official admission of German automotive failure. A meeting of the Panzer Commission produced a report documenting catastrophic final drive failures across all German tank types. The document's findings were absolutely devastating. Prior to the 1945 Eastern Offensive, there were 500 defective final drives in the Panzer IV, 370 defective final drives in the Panther, roughly 100 in the Tiger. Additionally, approximately 200 failures had been reported in the Hetzer tank destroyer. General Wolfgang Thomalla, Chief of Staff of the Inspector General of Panzer Troops serving under Guderian, explained the operational impact in stark terms. In such circumstances, orderly utilization of tanks was simply impossible. The troops lost confidence in their vehicles and in some situations abandoned whole vehicles just because of final drive problems, fearing they would be stranded and captured. German tanks, built to intimidate through impressive technical specifications, failed in the most fundamental requirement of armored vehicles: mechanical reliability sufficient to reach the battlefield and complete missions. That's the bottom line. What good is a superior weapon if it can't get to the fight? Kummersdorf, testing facility, prepared for evacuation in early 1945 as Soviet forces advanced relentlessly toward Berlin. Engineers frantically packed testing data and shipped documentation to facilities farther west, hoping to preserve technical intelligence for post-war analysis. Some of the captured tanks, including at least 2 Shermans, were pressed into improvised service, with combat units desperately defending the approaches to Berlin. These vehicles fought alongside German designs in the final desperate battles, providing one last comparison under actual combat conditions. The Shermans continued operating until destroyed by enemy fire or abandoned when fuel supplies ran out. The German tanks, including Panthers and the few remaining Tigers, broke down from mechanical failures at rates that shocked even experienced crews who were accustomed to poor reliability. The story of War Daddy 2 and the dozens of other Shermans tested at Kummersdorf represents one of the great industrial disparities of World War II. German engineers, working within an industrial system that prioritized theoretical perfection over practical utility, produced tanks that looked incredibly impressive on paper but failed in sustained field operations. American engineers, applying decades of automotive manufacturing experience to military requirements, produced tanks that lacked technical sophistication in many areas but worked reliably under conditions that defeated German equipment. In armored warfare, as in most military operations, the weapon that functions when needed beats the weapon that might be theoretically superior if it could actually reach the battlefield and complete its mission. Post-war analysis by American and British intelligence organizations confirmed what German testing at Kummersdorf had revealed years earlier. Systematic examination of destroyed German tanks found mechanical failures just as common as combat damage as causes of loss. Final drives broken from stress, transmissions seized from inadequate lubrication or operator error, engines burned out from overheating or oil starvation. The German obsession with individual vehicle superiority and impressive specifications had blinded them to the critical importance of reliability and maintainability. They built tanks that no conscript mechanic could maintain without extensive specialized training, powered by engines that demanded constant expert attention from skilled technicians, supported by a logistics system that collapsed under the accumulated strain of supplying countless unique parts to scattered units across multiple fronts. The lessons learned through testing at Kummersdorf directly influenced German tank design thinking in the post-war Bundeswehr of West Germany. When the Federal Republic began developing the Leopard 1 main battle tank in the 1950s, designers consciously emphasized reliability and maintainability over pure performance specifications. They studied American automotive engineering principles and deliberately applied them to military vehicle development. The resulting Leopard 1 incorporated many design philosophies that had made the Sherman successful. Robust powertrain with substantial design margins, easy maintenance requiring minimal specialized tools, standardized components enabling rapid field repairs, growth potential, allowing future upgrades without complete redesign. The Leopard 1 became one of the most successful tank designs of the Cold War era, serving with numerous armies and remaining in production for decades. It proved that German engineers could apply the lessons they'd learned the hard way during World War II. The captured Shermans at Kummersdorf, including War Daddy 2 with its distinctive name still painted on the hull, represented far more than enemy equipment brought home for technical examination. They were tangible proof that industrial maturity and sound engineering principles based on practical experience mattered more than theoretical technical innovation pursued without regard to manufacturing reality. German tank designers pursued advanced specifications because they believed superior technology could overcome material disadvantages and numerical inferiority. They were wrong. American tank designers built reliable vehicles because they understood, through hard-earned experience, that logistics, maintenance capability, and sustained operational availability determined victory in modern mechanized warfare. They were absolutely right, and their approach proved decisive. The reliability gap between Sherman and German tanks influenced not just tactical armored warfare, but fundamentally shaped broader understanding of military industrial capacity and its decisive role in modern conflict. Germany entered World War II with technical advantages in many weapons systems, possessing scientific knowledge and engineering expertise that exceeded most opponents. However, Germany lacked the industrial depth and manufacturing sophistication to maintain those advantages through sustained mass production, while simultaneously fighting enemies on multiple fronts. The United States entered the war with weapons that were often less technically sophisticated but possessed industrial capacity.